Hi all! Today we're talking about Sartre's theory of the look, which comes up in his chapter of the same title, In Being and Nothingness.
And now you're giving me the look.
Hello everybody. Today we're going to take a look at a video called Sartre's Theory of the Look. I saw this video on my recommended and I checked it out, having read very little Sartre I think I took a philosophy class in college once. And so this video caught my attention because I'd heard about him. I read a little bit about him. So I clicked on this video and, it got me thinking. It got me posing some questions of my own, and I thought it would be fun to record a response to it. So here we are. Let's begin.
How do we know that there are other subjects in the world? And how do we know ourselves as selves? Sartre thinks that in order to answer these two questions, we need to think about the way that others structure our experiences through the scene that he calls the look.
Well, I would challenge that first of all, because I don't think others necessarily structure our experiences. I think others are part of our experiences, but it's not as if you're completely out of control of your experience. I think you can structure your own experience.
Park. So imagine you are in a park and you're alone and you're walking along, you're seeing grass, you're seeing benches, etc. And then suddenly you see another person walking. Now for Sartre, that other person is fundamentally different from the other things that you have encountered so far in the park. They're different from the grass, the benches, the trees, because they appear to you as a center of their own experience. Sartre says, in seeing the other person, I feel the world stolen away from me. It's almost as if there is a sinkhole of being. Because as much as I like to think of myself as the organizing center of the world, as it turns out, there's somebody else who is the center of their own world. And this, he thinks, is a fundamentally threatening experience.
Of course, everyone is the center of their own world in that sense, but you are also the creator of your reality in a very real way. And what you believe is what you act out, and what you act out becomes who you are, and who you are plays a role in your experience of life.
So our first encounters with others for Sartre are fundamentally the site of conflict. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling of being together.
When I see someone else, I don't see it as diminishing from me or from myself, only in that I'm now joined by someone else who is experiencing much the same thing that I am, only from a different set of eyes, a different set of skin, a different set of identity even. But ultimately, they're experiencing reality as I am through this consciousness that, if you focus on moment to moment, is the same as someone else's moment to moment.
I still, however, can have a sense of my own transcendence. I still feel like even if there's another center of the universe, I am still the subject of my own. Things change fundamentally when the other turns and looks at me. Suddenly, I feel myself no longer as a subject, but as the object. I am the object of their gaze, and my sense of self completely collapses in a moment. This is the most important step of the look. So temporally, we might say that it's the second step. The first is looking at the other person. The second is the other person looking at me. But this second step temporally for Sartre is ontologically the first step. It's really what he means essentially by the look. Here, my subjectivity vanishes because it's in the face of another subject. So in experiencing another person looking at me, I apprehend them as a subject, but subjects look at objects. Thus, I feel myself as an object. And this feeling of being an object, Sartre calls shame. He says it can also be felt as pride, but pride is a sort of secondary response to shame. Shame for him is simply the feeling of being an object.
Have you considered that Sartre might have just been an antisocial loser? Apparently, he's the most famous atheist philosopher, so that makes sense. Maybe you feel like an object when someone else looks at you because you're insecure about your own existence. I don't like calling people subjects. I think a better word is observers. We are observers of reality. You see, what I'm supposing is that between these two observers in the park, there is a shared reality that is being perceived. I call that God. And the self is an illusion. There is ultimately no self. It's just this temporary point of view through a flesh and blood body that we're occupying. But this reality that is comprised of consciousness will go on with or without this idea of the self. And so actually having your entire view of reality shattered by someone else merely looking at you says more about the hollow, vapid point of view that comes from only having this idea of the self, and in fact having the self cloud your view of all of nature, of all of existence, of all of God. One philosopher I do listen to is Terence Mckenna, and he actually is highly critical of Sartre, who claims that nature is mute. But actually, Mckenna says that it is not nature that's mute, it is man who is blind.
But now raised to the nth degree by the assumption that nature is utterly without soul. And this philosophy persisted well into the 1950s. The essence of Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism can be summed up in the statement, nature is mute. That was Sartre's position on nature. How many people, thinking themselves existentialists and hanging out in coffee houses, actually ever worked through what the consequences of the existential point of view was? Nature is not mute. You really have to have worked yourself into a weird place to believe that, you know. In fact, nature is communication, because nature is psyche. This is what we haven't understood.
For Sartre, the gaze of the other involves the death of my possibilities. I no longer feel that I have this unlimited orientation to the world, that I'm able to transcend it, but rather my possibilities feel as if they fall into probabilities. And this follows directly from his contention that when we experience the look, we experience ourselves as reduced to effecticity. And this idea has actually been one of the key points of the look that folks have used since in developing concepts around gender and race, such as the male gaze or the white gaze. Frantz Fanon, in chapter 5 of Black Skin, White Masks, suggests that Sartre's view of the look actually needs to be taken a step further to account for what he calls the racial epidermal schema, or the ways that Black bodies in white space are perceived as fundamentally always already the objects of the look rather than the lookers.
The rest of the video by Overthink Podcast is about how there's a further breakdown of this, and the more modern philosophers talk about how Black bodies in white space feel like they are objectified, and all this kind of racial identity that comes with it now with modern interpretations. And that is the result, is that we are reduced to what other people think of us as. We are victims, we are subjects to other people's interpretations rather than observers who are sharing in this process of creation. Even if you don't want to accept God as part of this whole phenomenon, even if you just lock eyes with someone and you share a moment with them, you share a conscious experience with them that is intimate, that is lasting. Maybe it's somebody that you care about, somebody that you have feelings for, and somebody that shares those feelings for you. You might have lost yourself in this gaze, but what you've gained is everything through a sense of love. So it's someone else that you're perceiving of, somebody outside of you, that should be a totally separate perspective, and yet you're sharing this intimate, emotional perception of reality right now, looking at someone's eyes. Well, what does that connection mean? It means that there's a connection to something greater than yourself being experienced in that moment. And that greater than the self is the start of perceiving of a God, of a meaning to this existence beyond just subject, object. Yeah, I mean, I kind of just wanted to save you the time and offer my perspective and show where I disagree with Sartre, because while he might be a smart philosopher, philosophy is not solved by anyone, and there's no experts in the field as far as I'm concerned. I think everyone can have their own theories and perspectives. What matters most is the reason behind it. So anyways, that's my perspective on the gaze, or the look, or really the observation of one's own existence. And I think the problem that I see in the West these days, especially when it comes to any kind of philosophy or beliefs, is that people are so self-focused and self-obsessed, and they separate themselves from others, when I actually think people are more similar than they are different. And that's not just a biological or racial thing. It's a consciousness, a universality, a quality of universality that comes with being a conscious human being. So that's how I see it.